I'm gonna get this started officially. Good morning. I'm Alejandro with Parkinson's Point. We have our education nutrition session this morning. We have Dr. Emma speaking with us today, and I'll turn it over to her pretty much for the whole class. If you have any questions, you can present those, or you can wait till later if you feel like it's too personal. We can talk about that at a later time. But with that being said, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Emma.
Okay, sounds great. Well, super excited to chat with you all today. I know it's a fun time of the year and can also be kind of a tricky time for some of us to like balance health and navigate holidays and family and stuff. But excited to chat with you all just about like what are some tools and what are some ways that we can make our holidays a little bit supportive of our health and still have a really good time and enjoy friends and family and all that. So we have a few different things we can, kind of outline and can talk about, but I wanted to see if anyone, just to start with, does anyone have anything that comes to mind with them of like any challenges or kind of favorite things around the holidays?
No.
Not so much. Okay.
Yeah, and if you guys are muted and you want to unmute, mute yourselves back and forth, that's fine as well. Just make sure that when you go to talk, we got you unmuted there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start talking about, I just want to talk about 3 different strategies we can use to balance our blood sugar when we're talking about the upcoming holidays, because I know there's not only just holidays like the exact dates, but if you all are like me and what I have going on, it's like, oh, we have different gatherings all the time, and there's all, people are bringing in cookies all the time, and I feel like it can kind of be like a 6 weeks between Thanksgiving and New Year's of just solid sweets and sugar eating and stuff. So what we know is that we know sugar, really simple sugar, like sugar that comes from white flour, table sugar, corn syrup, things like that, can be really bad for our brain. It can create a process of a lot of inflammation for our brain and can really make Parkinson's symptoms worse. So we are always interested in balancing our blood sugar and not spiking or eating a lot of sugar so that our blood sugar goes up really quickly. And that's just really protective for our brains. And so, yes, when it comes to holidays and cookies and cakes and all sorts of breads and things like that, we kind of all of a sudden have to navigate eating a lot of those things. So we have a few strategies we'll talk about here. The first one is really thinking about sugar. Is it simple or is it complex? And so a lot of people will say like, oh, don't eat carbs, they're bad for you. But really carbohydrates are any structure of sugar that can be complex. So things like whole grains, fruits, vegetables, beans, all of that has carbohydrates and has healthy sugars in it. And they're healthy because they're in their whole form. They're packaged with things like fiber, vitamins, minerals, and water. And so when you eat those things, you're getting sugar, and your brain loves to have sugar. It's a great fuel for our brain. It's fuel for our muscles and all of that. But it slows down how quickly we absorb that sugar when you have things like fiber, vitamins, and minerals. So that's the number one strategy, is to try to think about how can I substitute something that is a very simple sugar. So all that fiber, the vitamins, the minerals have been removed. So in a really kind of classic example, we can think about like 100% whole wheat. So the whole wheat has the bran and the fiber and fats and vitamins packaged together. And white flour has all of those things removed so that it's more shelf stable, and it's just a very highly processed form of carbohydrate. And so that white flour, when we absorb it, we can quickly absorb it, gets into our bloodstream, and it spikes our sugar and creates an inflammatory response in our brain. So when we're navigating like recipes and cooking with friends and family, a really helpful tip is to think, is there a way that I can make this with a whole form of a carbohydrate and have that fiber component, because it really slows down absorbing blood sugar. There are other foods that have fiber that you can also add into treats so that they are slowing down the absorption. So have you all heard of like chia seeds or flax seeds ever? Yeah, so those are super high in fiber. And so when you add that in, like, let's say you add ground flaxseed into a cookie recipe or to oatmeal, like oatmeal raisin cookies, and you add something like 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed to the whole recipe, it helps bind everything and makes that absorption of sugar a lot slower. And so you're not going to get that inflammatory spike. So sometimes it's not even, you don't even have to necessarily substitute the entire recipe for a completely different flour as an example, but you can also add in things that have those fiber like the flaxseed or chia. And actually flaxseed can even substitute as for eggs. So you can even keep the same recipe and the ratio there, it's about a tablespoon of ground flaxseed to 1 to 2 tablespoons of water. And you let that sit together and it kind of forms this a little bit of like a gelatinous consistency that will keep your whole recipe together. So that's a really convenient, easy way to add that in. And then you don't even have to change the recipe. You just don't add eggs and you have the flax and it's a boost in fiber, which is really good for your brain. So other foods that are kind of, I think we don't really typically think of them as being high in fiber, but they actually do have a lot of fiber. One is avocado, which I really like because I think we look at it and we think it's creamy and smooth, so it wouldn't be high in fiber, but it actually is. And I love that because there are several recipes, and one of the recipes I'm going to share with Dr. Meredith at the end so that you all could have them taking home, is to make a like chocolate pudding, but it's made with avocado. And you don't taste the avocado at all. You just taste like this chocolatey pudding, but it has a super creamy texture from the avocado. You can also make it with bananas too as part of the sweetness, but and it actually has a lot of fiber. So it's, again, slowing down your sugar absorption and just, it's actually a really healthy fat. So it's super good for your brain. So those are different, just a few different strategies with fiber. And then the other thing too, is when there have been a few studies on this, where if you add in fruit, it is actually going to help slow down the absorption of sugar from those simple forms like table sugar or corn syrup or white flour. And you don't even have to not eat those simple sugars simply by pairing it with, and in some of the studies, they're usually looking at berries like raspberries and blueberries, blackberries, strawberries. But if you pair those two together, the natural fruit will help curb the spike in blood sugar. So my favorite is raspberries. There's a lot of fiber in raspberries, and like raspberries and chocolate goes really well together. So that's just kind of another strategy to think about, is if you're out eating or you're making something, to even offer like a little fruit salad with the dessert. So people can still have their brownies or their cake or whatever, but you're also providing fruit, which has the antioxidants, the fiber, and will just help curb that blood sugar spike. And just really good. So those are, kind of under the umbrella of how can we slow down sugar absorption? How can we get more fiber? That would be your first strategy, is how can I, whether it's, do I substitute a white flour for maybe a whole grain, or I'm substituting, instead of using whole flour, you could use seeds like flaxseed or chia seed, using things like avocados and raspberries and other fruit. But really thinking to ourselves, okay, how can I add in fiber and slow down the rapid sugar spike? Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions about that first kind of strategy?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What do you think of monk sugar?
Okay, so when I think of sugar substitutes, like we're thinking about monk fruit extract, we're thinking of stevia and xylitol and erythritol, like all of those, right? So I get a lot of questions about that. I have a couple thoughts. So in several research studies, they're trying to figure out, is it better to eat this substitute rather than like table sugar or corn syrup or something? And they found that what happens when you eat something that's really sweet, and monk fruit extract is about, I think about 200 times sweeter than table sugar, just per amount. So you only need a tiny bit. But what happens is when we eat that, our brain thinks, oh, I'm supposed to be getting carbs, like I'm supposed to be getting sugar. And then you don't actually get the sugar because it's just the flavor of sweetness, but you're not actually getting it. And so your body, what they found in studies is that you end up eating more sweets later in the day because your brain is thinking to itself, why haven't I gotten that sugar? And it'll actually make you crave more sugar down the line, like later in the afternoon or the evening. So what studies show is that it's not actually much better for us because of the human nature, because our brain is telling us, I got this sweet taste, where's my sugar? Why aren't I absorbing sugar? And so we end up eating more sugar later. So when I look at those studies, I tend to think I'd much rather you get sugar from a whole food source like fruit, like using bananas to sweeten something, dates or like using dried dates. You can also, so a really helpful thing, and I'll give you guys a recipe for this, but you use dates, you soak them in hot water for 5 to 10 minutes, and then you puree that. So you get like a date syrup or a date paste, and you use that in recipes. And so it's still sweetness, and you are still getting some sugar, but you're also getting that fiber and those vitamins and minerals. So you tend not to crave sugar as much in the long run, and you're able to balance your blood sugar better. So that's my go-to advice, is think about fruit or whole foods that are naturally sweet and try to use those things more. With that being said, if you can be really disciplined and you are like, I'm using monk fruit like sweetener, and I'm really disciplined to know that I'm not going to be having anything sweeter later on, you can do that. But a lot of my strategies we're trying to do like long-term success. And so I tend to think like, instead of dumping really sweet things into our food, like let's try to rely on whole foods as much as we can, just because that's what we're seeing in studies that work better long-term. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
It does, but monk sugar is safer than saccharin or sweet and low, isn't it?
Safer in terms of it has a little bit of a better profile in how it does metabolically. Like it is better in that sense, but it still has the same issue that ultimately, because it's so much sweeter than anything you'll find in natural food, your body is going to be craving more sugar ultimately.
I've got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So, and that's just kind of tricky because you're trying to do something healthy for yourself and you're trying not to have the sweet and low or the table sugar or corn syrup, but it can kind of make it harder on your will. Like I'm trying not to eat as much, and it's setting you up for a harder situation in the long run. So I feel mixed about it, is just perfectly honest. Like it's kind of hard to give like a very exact yes or no answer, but just be aware of that. Like, and if you try it and you're noticing that, yeah, later in the evening, I'm really wanting more sweets and I'm craving that, then I would try using something like bananas or pineapple or dates, things that are really naturally sweet. And a note about that is initially, it may not taste as sweet to you because you're making a transition, but after weeks of using that as the sweetener, your taste buds adjust and it'll become even sweeter than it was.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions right now?
I don't know how to work this. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. My question is, I can't have gluten. I have celiac.
Okay.
How do those grains fit in the other grains when I don't use wheat? barley or rye. I believe it's 3 that I can't have that have gluten in them. And so I've become, it's hard to go find all that. It's got, but Sprout's got a good selections of things, but I've noticed too, to make a lot of them taste better, there's higher sugar amounts in some of them. A lot of them, like the oatmeal. How does that affect the whole picture, the gluten for me? Or something like that?
Yeah. So in some ways, it's almost going to, if you can't eat wheat, flour, gluten, you're not going to have, in some ways, a lot of options, like all those cookies and brownies and cakes and those, standard things you are going to have to avoid completely. Now, there are some different types of flours and grains that you could try substituting if you're making your own. So people will use, commonly, you can try things like millet, teff, rice, certain things like that. But when I'll sharing these recipes, for example, like the avocado chocolate pudding, or there are these little like energy ball things that I recommend, or a few of the savory options. All of them don't have wheat at all. And so I'd almost encourage you to think about, like, instead of having to I have to find a flour that I can substitute for wheat flour, maybe just even thinking a little bit more outside the box and being like, I'm not going to include flour at all. And like, what kind of desserts can I make? Like, can I make a flourless chocolate cake? And so it's going to be a much more fudgy texture. But it can be packed with, other things that are actually really good for you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And I know that it's challenging. I think that's the biggest challenge, is when you're going to be interacting with like other people and going to parties and gatherings, because I imagine a lot of people aren't conscious about it necessarily.
If I know them, or if I'm going to a place that asks diet preference, I make sure that they know that. And they actually, anymore, a lot of restaurants and so forth are aware of that now and catering to that. So
Yeah.
contamination if they don't have their separate kitchen, that type of thing.
That makes sense. Well, yeah, and that's true. It's probably easier now than it was, 30 years ago, definitely. But I do think that, one thing would be always also sharing any of these recipes with your friends and your loved ones, of like, oh, or you bring your own something, and then people can taste it and realize, oh, this is really good. I like this. And then, kind of encouraging people to make things that won't have that flour in it at all.
I went to the symposium at CU there, the Newology put that on, and they quite a selection of gluten-free snacks and foods. I mean, of course, the fruit is all there, and so I got the fruit, and you have to watch the drinks too.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, is about, I feel like with substitutions can have the same problems that we're running into even with gluten. And so what I mean by that is, if you use a white flour from wheat, or you use a white rice flour, they're going to cause the same spike in blood sugar. So, even if you have a cookie that's gluten-free, it may not necessarily equate to being healthy. So that's why I give these general principles of, like, as much as you can focus on whole foods, things with their fiber, with fruit, with avocado, like just with real food, you'll kind of be avoiding the pitfalls of simple sugar, regardless if it's like gluten-free or not, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, reading the labels, and it's amazing.
It's amazing. I wish everyone read labels. I spend so long in the grocery store, so I pick up everything and like I'm reading what's in it. But when you start to understand what's actually in processed foods and prepackaged foods, you see a whole lot of things, like potato starch is added into a lot of gluten-free things for texture. And then again, it's like just a simple sugar. So I think that kind of brings us to like strategy 1.5, which would just be as much as we can make our own things or homemade things out of food that we recognize, then you'll be much better able to avoid those kind of pitfalls. Yeah. So the second strategy, I think that's really helpful for balancing blood sugar is timing of your meals and exercise. And I say exercise, I want to say it like really loosely. So maybe even thinking more about just movement. So there's something called postprandial walking, and postprandial just means after you eat. And we have really, really good research on this, specifically around prediabetes and diabetes, but it can be used by anyone to regulate your blood sugar. And what essentially it is it's 10 minutes of walking after you eat a meal. And it can be, I want you to like really think about, this is super helpful if you've eaten a larger meal or any meal with more of those sugars, or you've had dessert or something. And it can be kind of a change of pace and like something different to think about. A lot of times we gather to eat a big meal and then people might sit around and like watch TV or just sit and talk together and aren't moving. But if you're able to initiate just 10 minutes of movement after you have your meal, so that could just be like, let's just all go around and do like a walk around the block, or even if you have like a game at your home, so maybe someone has like a pool table or a board game that people can get up and move a little bit, or again, like especially if you're having like lunch, I know it gets dark kind of later at night, but trying to just get 10 minutes in, and you can invite your family and friends and loved ones to do it. You can go do it on your own. But it makes a significant difference in how high the spike of blood sugar goes after you eat. So it basically will bring, instead of doing a really sharp curve up and down of like my blood sugar goes really high, so it's spiking inflammation in my brain, we want to just drop it down a little bit. And we can do that by walking or moving for 10 minutes after we eat a meal. So I think one of the strategies that I've used over the years, and initially my family was like, why are we doing this? But it's kind of become more of a habit for us to say like, oh, let's actually move our meal a little bit earlier in the day so that we can go walk around a park or walk around the neighborhood or something for 10, 15 minutes after we eat. And then everyone gets that movement. We're still all together, and it can help curve that blood sugar. And this is a strategy, again, you can use in your daily life, especially if you're dealing with any kind of blood sugar imbalances. Anyone with Parkinson's, movement is really helpful. Always be safe, of course, if walking at night or on the ice, like, I don't want any of you to be not safe. So you can try different things, even just getting up and like dancing for 10 minutes after you eat your meal to some good music can be really, really helpful. So that's just something to think about and to see, like, especially around the holidays, like how can I just incorporate a little bit more movement after eating. So a lot of people will also ask me, like, should I exercise before I eat? And is that helpful? And exercising in general is helpful for managing blood sugar, but the exercise before doesn't have the same impact as after. And the basic reason for that is when you eat and blood sugar is rising, and then sparking sometimes that excess inflammation if it's going too high, exercise can take it down. Like, you already have enough sugar in your body that when you start moving your muscles will use it as fuel and immediately kind of drop that blood sugar down. Whereas if you start really, really low, it can sometimes help prevent how quickly it goes up, but a lot of times it doesn't, because of how much sugar you ate and that kind of thing. So postprandial, or after you eat, movement is really, really helpful. Any questions about that?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
How soon after you eat should you walk? I typically walk 1.5 miles at a time, and I try to walk twice a day, usually at 9 in the morning and at around 3 in the afternoon. I walk fairly fast, about 3 miles an hour.
Okay. So what I would recommend is after you've eaten a meal, try to walk within 15 minutes of finishing that meal. And that would be, so if you're regularly walking, what you just said, 9 a.m. and about 3 p.m., if you're going to have a larger, like, let's say you have a large lunch at like noon, if you could shift up your walk to be a little bit earlier, it can help take the edge off of that blood sugar. But like I said, you only need to walk about 10 minutes to help bring the blood sugar down. So if you're already doing those 2 walks at 9 a.m. and 3 p.m., and then let's say you have dinner at 5 or 6, you could just do a lap or 2 around the block just to take the edge off after dinner, and that would be really helpful.
Okay.
And I think it could be a tool, like if you're not struggling, like if you know that you're eating fairly well, and when I say that, I mean like you're eating lots of vegetables and fruits, you're not having a lot of blood sugar issues, then it doesn't have to be after every single meal. But if you're going over and you're like, oh, I went and had a delicious meal and I ate 5 cookies and I'm really feeling it, then that would be a great time to do the postprandial walking.
I do the cooking, and we really work on getting at least 5 helpings of fruits and vegetables a day,
Fantastic.
typically mostly at the noon meal.
Okay. That's fantastic. And with some of these recipes, you could also just, I'm hoping that you can give it a try and just see if there are some other ways to, incorporate fruits and veggies throughout your day. But it sounds like you're doing a lot with really eating those fruits and vegetables and walking twice a day. That's awesome.
Okay.
It's really, really good. And again, it can be, the postprandial walking can be a tool. Like for some people, if they're struggling with managing blood sugar, then I think it's something they should do every day, to really eat your meal and then have at least 10 minutes of walking. But for other people, if that's not as much of an issue, then it can be used as a tool when you're eating heavier meals, or you're saying like, oh, dinner, I didn't have any vegetables with my dinner and I wasn't really, like, I was eating more simple or maybe processed foods, then that's a great time to go do your postprandial walking.
If I can't pronounce the names of the stuff in food, I tend to not eat it.
That's such a good rule of thumb, isn't it? If I can't say it, I don't think it's food.
One more question. I try to walk faster and get my heart rate up. Does that have any effect on balancing out your sugar spike?
It does. So basically, when you get your heart rate up more and you're exerting more effort, your muscles are needing more sugar to fuel the movement. So more intensity, and specifically things like if you're adding in a little bit of resistance. So naturally, when we're walking, we have some gravity on our legs, but if you were to use, let's say, like a pound weight in each hand while you're walking, theoretically, then that would actually drop your blood sugar even more because your muscles are having to work a little bit harder. So if you are bringing a little bit more intensity, then you're going to be using more of that sugar that's already in your bloodstream.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
How does that relate to going to bed? And I have hard time getting to sleep. And I usually eat a couple hours before I go to bed, 3 hours or so. Does that the sugars have anything with that to do with that when you're going to bed and trying to, or not?
It definitely can. So if you have elevated blood sugar, when we talked about how if you do get a sharper, like a higher spike in blood sugar, it can cause inflammation in the brain. And specifically with Parkinson's, we already have a picture of too much inflammation in our body and our brain. And so when you get additional inflammation, that can be very aggravating for our system and can disrupt sleep. So essentially, when we sleep at night, it's a time for our body to do important repair work. So our brain is repairing damaged tissue, we're detoxing, we're getting rid of just general toxins that are super normal, but it's a time where our body's supposed to be resting and repairing. And if you've eaten, and especially if a lot of people do dessert with their dinner, it's less common to have dessert with breakfast, but there are those people who do that too. But more commonly, it's you're going to have like a larger dinner and maybe dessert. And so you can have a higher spike in blood sugar and inflammation that can take 6 to 8 hours to go back down to normal. And so doing a evening walk is really healthy in that context, to be able to say like, oh, I had dinner at 6, I'm finished at 6:30, and I do my 10 or 15 minutes of walking. That could have a really good impact on your sleep potentially. It'll also just help you digest things a little bit better.
Yep. You always hear it's counterintuitive to what I've always heard, that you don't work out before you go to bed because you'd be all jazzed up. But in this case, we have to make the choice on the sugar. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that I typically don't recommend doing a really intensive or long workout in the evening. So, the difference too is like if you go to the gym or something, let's say from 7 to 8 at night, that's pretty intense. And that could disrupt your sleep too, because you're getting endorphins and kind of waking your whole body up. But if you're having your meal and then you do, again, your neighborhood walk for 10 minutes with maybe your partner or maybe a child or your grandchildren or something, or by yourself, whatever it is, that can be something that is not quite as intense, but it just gets the balance there. And really, I know this may sound very simple, but we actually have studies that looked at just 10 minutes of walking or 15 minutes of walking after eating and what that does for your blood sugar and just balancing that. So that's what I would really recommend. And again, with food timing, if you're trying to incorporate that, and if you think it might be you don't want to exercise too close to going to sleep, then it could be considering shifting your last meal of the day to be a little bit earlier, so that you have time to digest and to move and stuff, and so that your body at night can really focus on all that important repair work and brain health work that it needs to do.
One more question. Melatonin, I take that 10 milligrams. How does that fit in? Does that affect sugar too, or is it just telling your body that it's time to go to sleep? Because I guess
Yeah. Well, so basically melatonin is a hormone that our bodies make naturally. And in Parkinson's, that pathway is actually affected. So there's something called REM sleep disorder that's really common in Parkinson's disease. And so you can actually have trouble making enough melatonin. So not only I feel like in kind of, without Parkinson's, a lot of us might struggle with getting good sleep. So we might want to take melatonin, but then if you add Parkinson's on top, it's a really good idea to have potentially for some people melatonin to help. And that's a hormone. So if we think about hormones travel in our bloodstream throughout our body. And so it is impacted by inflammation and excess blood sugar. And when we have more inflammation in our body, our brain won't focus as much on making melatonin and a healthy circadian rhythm because it's dealing with more of that inflammation. And so that's seen more chronically, okay, chronically, I've been eating a certain way for 40 years or whatever it is. And that's affected my brain's ability to like rest and do repair work and make the melatonin. And so it can really help your endogenous or your production of melatonin. If you're able to balance your blood sugar and kind of decrease that brain inflammation. And the melatonin, like a last thought about that, sleep and melatonin, our body, our brain, the place we make it, in our pineal gland in our brain, it operates on a 24-hour cycle. And so what I mean by that is getting, for example, early morning light exposure is just as important to your sleep at night as taking melatonin, like melatonin production at night. It's a 24-hour cycle. So if you wake up and you get exposure to light from the sun in the morning, like as soon as you wake up, instead of staying inside with like curtains closed, like open your curtains, get that fresh, that light, go have your cup of coffee and sit outside even for 5 or 10 minutes to get that light. That tells your pineal gland to make more melatonin that night when you sleep.
Okay.
So we're really, when we think about sleep in general, we want to think about it in this whole cyclic nature that's happening all the time. So it's not only what we do at bedtime that matters and that affects our sleep, it's what we're doing throughout our entire day that will also impact how we sleep. So yes, so if we have poorly managed blood sugar throughout the day, that causes extra inflammation, and our brain is like, I have to go deal with that inflammation at night instead of making melatonin and having a little bit of a healthier process.
And a good time to take melatonin. I take this before bed, or is it better to take it a little bit earlier for it to work better?
So I can't give anyone like specific recommendations just because I don't know you and everything about it, but I'll tell you this is generally what I do when I work with patients. So typically, if you need help falling asleep, you would want to take it before you go to bed, like 30 minutes before. But some people have issues with waking up in the middle of the night. So I do prescribe a form of liquid drops, melatonin, like liquid form. So some people can also dose in the middle of the night, and the ideal, and again, it depends on the person, but you can dose anywhere between like 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. because that's a natural time where our body would make our own melatonin. And so I work with individuals to try to find that sweet spot of like, how much do I take before bed? Do I take some when I wake up? If so, how much do I do then? But I like the liquid format because you can absorb it better. So if you're taking a pill, in the middle of the night, your digestive system is supposed to be sleeping. You're not supposed to wake up and be eating in the middle of the night, really. We want our brain and our whole body to be doing that detox and that repair work. And if you're eating, then it has to put that energy and that blood flow towards digesting. So I don't recommend eating at night, and I don't recommend taking pills at night as much as we can. So if you can do liquid form of any medications or supplements during the night, then you'll be able to absorb it really quickly, and you won't have to, divert your brain's focus and the body focus to digesting.
Thank you
Is
very
that
much.
helpful?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Okay, any other questions about that, kind of like the food timing and walking?
Melatonin that I take is in a pill. It's 5 milligrams. And they didn't say it outright, but they alluded to sublingual as being a method of taking it.
So that's kind of a similar principle that if you take it sublingually, you can absorb more of the melatonin and you don't have to rely on digestion from your stomach and stomach acid. So we also know that in Parkinson's, we can have suboptimal digestion. So we're not producing as much stomach acid. We're not able to metabolize it and digest. And, so many people struggle with constipation, of course, and just having good motility. So if you're able to take things that are more easily digestible, so liquids or powders, like a powder multivitamin that disintegrates, into water and you can drink that, then you'll have a better time for the most part digesting and absorbing. And same thing with sublingual. So you're doing some of your digestion in your mouth before it even gets to your stomach. Yeah.
I have
So
no
it just kind of
problem.
depends. I just like the liquid form. I think it works really well for a lot of people. But if sublingual works for you or a powder form works for you, I think it's really worth investigating or exploring those types of formats rather than a pill or a capsule that has to be digested in your stomach.
Which is
So-
seven.
I have trouble falling asleep, but I do have problems waking up and then not being able to sleep. I often get up and read, sometimes for an hour or more before I can go back to sleep. So I would have an eyedropper, something like that, and I could take it when I wake up.
So yeah, it's very common. And yeah, I couldn't tell you exactly what you would need to do and when and what dose and stuff, because I haven't worked with you, Brian, but yes, the short answer is you can take melatonin at night when you wake up. And again, that's when I would tell people to do the liquid form, so that, yeah, it's a little dropper. And so you would just take it and you would take, it depends on the person, but you would just take a couple drops or a dropper full. And you don't even have to take it with water or anything. You can just take it directly like that. And if you wake up really late in the night, like let's say you wake up at 4 or 5 a.m., it could make you really groggy. You might be really tired if you take it at that. So I typically recommend, again, to take it, but if you're waking up, let's say at midnight or 1 or 2, that would be a really ideal time in the night to take an additional dose.
It's typically between 3 and 4. I call 4 o'clock the witching hour.
Okay. Well, it depends. You could try it. Again, it might make you a bit groggy if you give yourself another dose of melatonin at that time, but you also might be able to do just a tiny bit, like, a very small amount that could help you. I don't know. But again, I do with people with Parkinson's, taking an additional dose when you wake up in the night can be really helpful and effective. Because again, right, like you're describing, there's a difference between falling asleep and then there's staying asleep and waking up in the middle of the night. So it is one of those things that can be safe to take.
Okay, thanks. You helped. That's my nugget for the day.
Perfect. Yes, go ahead, Robin.
What does sublingual mean? I don't know that word.
Oh,
So-
yeah. It means under your tongue.
Oh, okay. I kind of thought that, but
Yeah. No, exactly. So it means under your tongue. So basically, there are some types of medications and supplements that you can start, like we have digestive enzymes in our mouth, actually. And so it can start the digestive process and you can start absorbing things from your mouth, which is really helpful if you have poor digestion, in your stomach. And you can just, it can be absorbed more quickly as well.
I do use that then for the melatonin, but I always end up chewing it, breaking it up.
Yeah.
I can't. So I could, the liquid would probably look better, I guess.
Yeah. And so some pills are not meant to be, in fact, most pills, most capsules are not meant to be absorbed and, taken just under your tongue. So you definitely want to make sure you're really reading the label correctly and working with your provider to make sure, because sometimes things are coded specifically to not be digested until it reaches, your stomach. So,
Thanks. Thank you.
yeah. Okay. And so I think the last strategy just to think about, and I know we're not quite at time yet, but we're kind of close to wrapping up here. But the last strategy I want you all to think about is, and this is tricky, I just want to preface this, because if you are taking any kind of medication that contains levodopa, so if any of you are taking like Sinemet or something else that's containing carbidopa, levodopa, you do not want to take that medication and eat protein at the same time. That protein really will affect how much medication you get. So I hope that's not news to everyone. I hope everyone already knows that, but if you don't, that's something that's really important to know that. So for example, if I'm taking my medication and 20 minutes later, I'm eating a large chicken breast, that amount of protein from the chicken is going to greatly diminish the effect of your levodopa. So it makes it a little bit tricky when you're talking about taking your medications throughout the day and then spacing out your protein. So I do know that. But with that being said, a strategy to balance, again, blood sugar and inflammation is to eat a balanced meal or a balanced snack that contains some carbohydrates, but also healthy fats and some proteins together. And the reason being is that the healthy fat and protein can bind to the carbs and again, slow down. We're trying to just slow the curve down. We're trying to avoid sharp spikes that lead to inflammation. We're trying to slow it down. So pairing foods together, it can be really helpful. So if you're thinking about like, oh, sometimes for a snack, I just go for chips, or I just go for a piece of toast, or I go for like a sandwich that has just, some bread and cheese. Those aren't necessarily as well balanced, and it's not putting you're putting a lot of carbs or very simple foods like just potatoes, which are carbohydrates, or like potato chips that have been fried. You're putting that directly into your system without pairing it with these other things that can help. So I love, and again, a couple of the recipes that I'm providing are thinking about, okay, how do I bring in different food groups in new ways and can bring that together. So I have a snack or a meal that is really healthy. And healthy meaning we're trying to use whole foods and we're trying to have some carbohydrates, some proteins, and some fat all together. With protein, you may, if you're trying to be strategic around your medication and you're restricting protein at a certain meal or during snacks, then I want you to lean on those healthy fats and make sure you're getting healthy fats. Healthy fats are so good for your brain, especially with Parkinson's. And what I mean by healthy fats, I'm talking about things like avocados, walnuts, olive oil, other types of nuts, seeds, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, even certain things like egg yolks from chickens that have been raised in pastures contain a lot of omega-3 fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory, really healthy for the brain. So just think about how can I incorporate some of these healthy fats with my carbohydrates at the bare minimum, and then look at protein and see how you can fit it in depending on what your medication schedule is. But that's a good strategy. So I would even think too, so if you're going over to people's houses or you're going out to celebrate, you can also think of having a small amount of healthy fats and carbs, like just a little snack before you go out, so that you're going out with some pretty even blood sugar and you have something in your digestion that will help carry you through those few hours. Any questions about that?
For fish, like salmon or something like that, I heard that all good fat that they have and stuff or not. I've heard kind of some things that it's not sometimes.
Fish, yeah. So fish is kind of interesting. What I would say is that there are a lot of types of fish and seafood that are higher in contaminants because of just how like the metals and the toxins in our system. And so there are certain fish that you definitely don't want to eat with a lot of regularity. And there are a few strategies around that. So I can provide you all, if you go to the Environmental Working Group, they have a consumer guide for all seafood, and it tells you which seafood has certain amounts of these like mercury and other heavy metals and toxins. So they will recommend these are things you should avoid. These are things you can have 1 to 2 times a week. These are things, that you can eat more regularly. So our kind of smaller fish like sardines and anchovies, those are things that are not going to have the higher level of toxins. And so those are things that can be, they have those healthy omega-3s and you can eat with more regularity. I think something like the sockeye salmon, that's something that I would say you can have, but I wouldn't have it more than once a week just because of those toxins. And then there's certain things like tuna. If you have Parkinson's, I just don't recommend tuna because of the mercury levels in general. And why it matters even more in Parkinson's is because we have a lot of evidence showing us now that Parkinson's, for some people, this is not for everybody, but for a lot of people, it can be really connected to toxic exposure. Those neurons that make dopamine in our brain are very sensitive to metals and to toxins. And so especially when we have Parkinson's, we really want to think about trying to avoid intaking, those as much as possible. So when it comes to fish, try to aim for those smaller fish, and you can have it sometimes. And I would use it again strategically. Like if you need some extra protein, really focus on, okay, I'm going to have this away from my levodopa. I'm going to have this fish and I'm going to eat it with some vegetables, and maybe sometimes you can also pair fish with chlorella. I don't know if you've all heard of chlorella. It's a specific algae that actually it can bind to heavy metals, which is really great. So I typically recommend from patients with Parkinson's, if you're going to have some fish, you can take a couple chlorella capsules at the same time, and it can kind of help to bind to any of those potential toxins in the fish. But you can still get the benefit of the protein and the omega-3 fatty acids and healthy fats from the fish.
How do you spell
And-
it? CLA, chlorella?
CHLORELLA. Yeah, chlorella.
Thank you.
Yeah, and chlorella can be used for a few different things, but I use it regularly to help with any kind of like extra toxins. And it's not gonna bind to everything, but it definitely helps bind to certain metals. So if you eat that with your fish, that's a great combination to have together.
And collagen, what is that? Collagen, is that?
Yeah, collagen. So collagen is straight amino acids. Amino acids is basically the scientific name for the protein that we think of. There are lots of little different type of protein molecules, and they're called amino acids. So collagen is a specific grouping of these amino acids or these proteins that come from connective tissue of animals. So they'll grind up like bones, tendons, things like that to give you the collagen. And we have collagen throughout our body. So it's in our skin, our hair, our bones, our muscles. It's every part of connective tissue. Basically, if you think about any part of your body that needs to be connected to something else, we'll have different types of collagen. So I like collagen because it gives us flexibility on timing of protein. Again, if you're taking something like Sinemet, you're trying to avoid protein within 2 hours of taking that medication. So, but you will still need to have enough protein. And especially if you're worried about maintaining your muscle or maintaining your weight, you definitely need to make sure that you're having enough protein in your day. So you can add collagen. So different products have different amounts, but frequently they'll come with a scooper, and that'll be about 10 grams. It depends though, each product is different, but it'll be about 10 grams of protein. So you can add collagen into your oatmeal. You could add it into water. It's not tasteless, but it's pretty close. It's pretty easy to add. You could add it into a smoothie, and you could add 1 to 2 scoops. So you're getting 10 to 20 grams of protein right there. And I even have people who add it into their coffee and they don't even taste it. They're adding like 10 to 20 grams into their coffee. So they're supporting themselves by getting some good protein in. It helps support your connective tissue. So it helps support your joints, your brain, your gut. It's great. And you can add it to so many different things. So you can control the timing between when you take you have protein and when you're taking your medications.
Jello, made from collagen, I think. Jello, Jello, or,
Oh, yeah. So exactly. So gelatin and collagen are the same amino acid profile. It's just there's a bond that's either hydrolyzed or not. So it basically just affects how things dissolve in water, basically.
okay.
But yes, I have a recipe and I can send this over. I call it a jelly recipe, but it's using gelatin and things like grapefruit juice or something like that. And the reason why I put those two together is because to make new connective tissue and do connective tissue repair, you need vitamin C. And so anytime you take collagen, you should take vitamin C with it. But you can get vitamin C through a lot of the foods that you eat. And so just make sure you do those two together. So vitamin C is found in citrus, strawberries, green leafy vegetables like kale, kiwi, a bunch of different stuff. So I like this jelly recipe. So that can be a really good snack too, because you're getting protein and something like the grapefruit, if you like that flavor, or you can make it with orange juice or something like that. So you're getting that vitamin C and the collagen together.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So let me make a note of that. I'll send that recipe to Dr. Meredith as well. I'll add that in. And I even add sometimes, like I'll blend up fruits and stuff to it. I don't know. You can have fun with it.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think, so we are coming close to our time. I know I will have to be signing off here shortly, but is there any last minute question that I could also, if you have other questions, I can respond to them. I can write out an answer too, if there are any other questions.
Now, you mentioned tuna. So is it all tuna or with all the,
Yeah, so when it comes to the fish, why don't I send you guys the link to the consumer guide for fish and which type of fishes have certain like mercury or other contaminants and not. The like tuna light that you can find in like the cans or packages are less like they have less mercury than if you get like ahi tuna or something, if you're going to get sushi, something like that. But let me send you all the link so that you can look up each individual fish and kind of go through like which ones are higher in contamination and not. Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you so much for presenting all that information. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
Yes, there always is, isn't there?
That was awesome. When is the next one?
I want to say that we were going to try for the beginning of January, that kind of
Yeah.
first Friday of January.
All right.
Yeah, but we can be in touch with that. I'll chat with Dr. Meredith and I'll get this information sent out to you all and get you all some recipes you can try this month. I hope you all have really good holidays and a happy new year.
You too. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and feel free to send any other questions you might have.
okay,
Cool.
thank you.
Great.
All
All
right.
right. Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Bye.
You guys have a great day. We'll conclude that session. And if you guys do have any other questions, feel free to reach out.